Severed body parts scattered across a field. Who was the victim? Investigators and scientists must reconstruct this human being piece by piece. But without a positive ID of the body, someone's going to get away with murder. Enter the world of forensic science, the science of crime, where a suspect's guilt or innocence can hang on a single piece of evidence. The head is the single most important part of the human body. It controls everything. It is also our identity. Who are we without it? Exhibit A, 17 severed pieces of a human body. March 1987. A game warden north of Montreal finds what appears to be pieces of a human corpse scattered in the woods. Homicide is called in, and one of the first on the scene is Detective Jacques Landry.
There was not only one piece, but a lot of pieces, all spread out in an area about, I would say, 500 feet away.
Ident officers gather the body parts from around the immediate vicinity. Some of the parts have remnants of fabric still frozen to them. Detective Landry comes upon a trunk nearby. It's empty. But barely visible inside the luggage tag, they find a crumpled up piece of paper. The tag is sent to the documents section of the Quebec Forensic Science Center for further tests. The body parts are all collected and sent to the morgue to be autopsied. Usually, the pathologist gets a whole body to work on. Not this time.
We received 17 bags with 17 body parts as they had been found on the ground. Unfortunately, the one piece we didn't have was the head.
Not only does Lausanne have to find out how this man died, but also who he was.
The role of the pathologist is to make bodies talk. They don't speak English. They don't speak French. They speak a language that gives us many indicators we can use to begin determining what happened to a person just before or even after death.
For the pathologist, these body parts are speaking, but just a little. Having no head complicates his autopsy. Lausanne is unable to determine the cause of death. What he can say by observing the clean cuts to the body parts is that the victim was dead and frozen when his body was cut up by a saw of some kind. But the most daunting challenge Lausanne faces is to determine who the man is.
L'ensemble du corps nous suggérait une personne.
To me, the body suggested someone who came from the Mediterranean area because of the color and pigmentation of the skin. On the upper right chest, we found a birthmark.
Parmi ces particularités-là, on retrouvait dans le dos de la personne.
On the back were white spots. These could have been discoloration caused by the fact that this person had been dead a certain amount of time, or it could have been the result of an illness, which is called vitiligo, which results in a loss of pigmentation in the skin.
Dr. Lausanne will need several points of comparison to be able to prove who it is in a court of law. Meanwhile, from the documents section, investigators get what they hope is a lead from the scrap of paper in the luggage tag. There is a name on the paper. It appears to read Alejandro Bainstein. They search civic records in Montreal to obtain current addresses for Mr. Bainstein's home and business. Detective Landry goes to the home address, proceeding with great caution. As he has no idea yet who the dead man is, he doesn't want to alarm anyone unnecessarily. He wants to watch and assess before making any moves. From neighbors, he learns that Alejandro Bainstein is a successful businessman, that his wife's name is Carol, and that the couple have 2 young children. He notices there's no sign of Mr. Bainstein. Landry begins watching Bainstein's computer business. He sees Carol Bainstein come and go, sometimes with their kids, but most often alone. She appears to be running the store. Again, her husband is not around. From discreet inquiries, Landry learns that Bainstein is thought to be in Vancouver to start a franchise of his successful business. Surveillance of a retail business isn't easy with so many people passing through, so Landry searches for patterns that may help determine his next step. It's an unusual approach, but Landry wants to find out as much as he can before speaking to those close to Alejandro Bainstein. He notices a couple of people during the first week of his surveillance who seem to be regular visitors. The first is a neighbor of the Bainsteins, Philippe Laberge. The other meets with Mrs. Bainstein on several occasions. Investigators find out he's a pal of Laberge, whose name is Robert Craig. Investigators turn up a third interesting individual, nicknamed Mikey. He's known to be Alejandro Bainstein's best friend. A week into his surveillance, and so far Landry has precious little to go on. He has a headless body which has been sawn into 17 pieces, a name on a crumpled piece of paper, a missing man, Alejandro Bainstein, and 4 people who may know where he is now. Landry needs to make his move to get closer to the source. But who should he turn to first? Detective Landry has a hunch that Mikey may be his best source of information about Alejandro Bainstein. Cautious at first, Mikey tells Landry that Alejandro is a loyal friend, a devoted family man who adores his 2 kids. He's well liked in the small Spanish-Jewish community of Montreal. Landry learns that lately Alejandro has been heartbroken because his wife has been having an affair with their neighbor, Philippe Laberge. It's the kind of lead that Landry is looking for. According to Mikey, the affair took its toll on Alejandro. Even though he still worked at the store, Alejandro moved out of the house and got his own apartment. Mikey tells Landry that 2 weeks ago, he went to visit his friend at the store. He was surprised when Carol told him that her husband had gone to Vancouver to set up a new business. Just days earlier, Mikey had lunch with Alejandro, and he never mentioned a trip to Vancouver. It's just not like Alejandro to leave town without saying something. Landry's starting to smell a rat. On Landry's request, Mikey supplies photos of Alejandro. Can these pictures help the pathologist connect the 17 body parts found in the field with Alejandro Bainstein? Luckily, in some of the pictures, Alejandro is wearing a bathing suit.
On a bien vu, bien identifié.
We did identify a birthmark in the same place, on the upper right chest.
But it's not enough to convince a court of law. This could still be just coincidental.
In such a major crime as an homicide, if you cannot even start with the identification of the victim, you got nothing, you cannot even start.
Like the investigators, the scientist must go the extra mile in this macabre case. There are many hospitals in Montreal, but he feels that since Alejandro is Jewish, he might at some time have gone to the city's Jewish General Hospital. If so, there could be medical records or x-rays that would provide more information about Mr. Bainstein. The hunch pays off. When the medical records are forwarded to Dr. Luzon, he is immediately able to confirm that Bainstein did in fact have the skin disease vitiligo, as the body parts suggested. Luzon is closer to being able to convince a jury of the identity of the victim. Detective Landry is closing in as well. He goes to see the superintendent at Alejandro's apartment building, armed with a search warrant. The super invites him into her apartment to talk. Little does he realize how significant a chat over a cup of tea will become. The super tells him that Carol Bainstein came to the building 2 weeks earlier, producing a telegram from San Francisco, claiming it was from her husband. It gave his wife permission to do whatever she liked with his belongings. The super says she observed Mrs. Bainstein with 2 men moving Alejandro's belongings. While the threesome was cleaning out the apartment, the super noticed Mrs. Bainstein washing out a bed cover in the bathtub. The water had all turned red. While Mrs. Bainstein was quick to say it must have been from the dye in the fabric, the whole incident had left the super with a strange feeling that something was wrong. Detective Landry's pulse quickens as he begins to imagine what might have happened. He's anxious to look in Alejandro's apartment. The apartment is spotless. Or is it? Landry finds what appears to be several drops of blood. A blood specialist, Francois Julien, is brought into the apartment to investigate further.
The apartment was, I would say, was quite clean, with few stains here and there, and few of these stains were in fact blood. In the bedroom there was blood on the walls, in fact, at least 2 walls. There was blood on the floor, in the cracks. So we picked up that blood.
It is starting to point to a strong possibility of foul play. At the time of this investigation, DNA typing is not yet a science admissible in court, and scientists cannot accurately identify a person from tissue or blood samples. Julien uses ABO testing to determine whether the blood is from the same source as the body parts.
The results I had were identical to the one I had on the body parts.
These results are helpful, but still not conclusive in determining the identity of the victim. This new information from the lab gives Landry enough to go to a judge and get wiretaps on Bainstein's home and business. But then investigators are thrown a curve. In looking at Alejandro's credit card records, they discover a lot of recent transactions in Bainstein's name on the West Coast, exactly where he is supposed to be. All of a sudden, it looks like Bainstein might just be alive. Landry enlists the help of a homicide investigator in Vancouver.
I sent him pictures of the victim, the neighbor, the pal, a few pictures. says, I would like you to go to these places and ask them if they've seen these people.
Based on information he receives from homicide in Vancouver, Landry determines that it was not Alejandro at all who had been out west, but rather LaBerge's pal, Robert Craig. Had Craig been on the West Coast signing documents in Bainstein's name? Craig is starting to look very guilty to investigators. It turns out he's got a criminal record in Europe. Detective Landry also learns more about LaBerge and believes that he also has a questionable history. Landry still needs to keep a close eye on him. From the wiretaps, Landry learns that LaBerge has been making calls to a number north of Montreal. It turns out LaBerge has a cottage up there, and the phone number is that of his neighbor. Landry knows that he has to continue following his hunches, so he takes a drive up north to talk to LaBerge's neighbor. The neighbor tells Landry that he does know LaBerge, and that in fact LaBerge had recently borrowed a chainsaw. The man adds that he heard the chainsaw being used late into the night a few weeks ago. Once again, Landry's hunch has paid off in spades. It all starts to fit.
Well, you can imagine what kind of deduction we came out with it. It says, maybe it was not a tree, then it was cutting during the night.
Could this be a breakthrough for Landry? The tool that had torn Alejandro Bainstein into 17 pieces. More importantly, could it prove who had done it? Now that investigators and the forensic team had the chainsaw in their possession, they began running tests. But the chainsaw didn't yield its information easily.
On the blade itself, there was no fibers, there was no blood, there was nothing that could be related to the case. And I thought that maybe if I remove the protective cap, I remove all the sawdust inside, and I looked under the microscope, and what I found was fibers and fibers and fibers, and what seems to be bone chips.
Upon further testing, scientists are able to connect the fibers found inside the chainsaw to the bedsheet material found wrapped around the frozen body parts.
And the piece of what I thought was a piece of bone was submitted to the pathology, and they looked under the microscope to know if it was bone, and in fact it was bone.
The evidence is looking very damning by now, but it's still all circumstantial. As a result, they couldn't irrefutably prove who had used the chainsaw to perform this gruesome murder. No one had seen the chainsaw being used, nor were there any fingerprints on it.
You have to prove or bring the evidence without any doubt, reasonable doubt. Then there was a man at the end of the chainsaw using the chainsaw.
Without a major break and without DNA, how is Landry going to nail the murderer or murderers? Before he can act against any of the suspects, he desperately needs absolute confirmation from Dr. Lazan, the pathologist, that the body parts are in fact those of Alejandro Bainstein. Otherwise, the guilty party might get away scot-free. There's no murder without an identifiable victim. It is all up to Lazan.
We compared X-rays from the body parts with X-rays from the hospital. We had the impression that they were from the same person.
So he sends them for a radiologist's second opinion. Through a rarely used comparison of the pelvic region, the identity is confirmed.
The radiologist compared the X-rays too, and he confirmed that indeed it was the same person.
Finally, after several months of exhaustive investigation, Dr. Lazan can say without doubt that the 17 pieces are from the body of Alejandro Bainstein. Now that they have a victim, Landry can go after the suspects. LeBerge, Craig, and Carol Bainstein herself. The chainsaw evidence, the blood in the apartment, the suspicious cleanup, all point to a deadly conspiracy. In addition, it's established that the credit card signatures from out west turn out to be forgeries, and that Craig has been signing Bainstein's name. They are now able to reconstruct how the murder may have been committed. Someone came to Alejandro Bainstein's apartment. Someone that he probably knew. Someone that he let into the apartment because, as Landry observed, there were no signs of forced entry. Someone murdered Alejandro in his apartment, probably by shooting him in the head as he was forced onto the bed, thus soaking the bedspread in blood. They left that night or shortly thereafter, carrying Alejandro's body in a trunk. The body was probably frozen either outside or in a deep freeze, then cut up in its frozen state and dropped at the remote location. Sounds plausible, but not everyone thought so. In the trial that followed, the jury acquitted Craig of murder charges. Carol Bainstein and LeBerge were convicted of murder, but both of them appealed. The results, in the opinion of many, were shocking. Mrs. Bainstein, who during the first trial insisted that LeBerge had been a major player in the murder, for some reason now softened her story in the appeal, shifting the guilt away from LeBerge. The jury overturned LeBerge's conviction. That left Carol Bainstein. In an almost surreal turn of events, the jury felt that there was enough evidence to convict her as an accessory to murder, even though there was no convicted murderer. She was sentenced to 10 years. Alejandro Bainstein left behind his 2 young children, now being raised by relatives. His children, friends, and community loved him well, but no one could save him from his tragic end. Although the dedicated work of investigators and forensic scientists was able to give Alejandro Bainstein back his identity, the outcome was hardly satisfying. All their determination and thorough work wasn't enough to put away a cold-blooded murderer. The stories on Exhibit A are based on actual cases. The names of the victims have been changed to protect their identities.